Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. She froze in the doorway, the world narrowing to the sharp electric pulse of what she had just walked in on. The faint rustle of clothing, the lingering warmth of our lips still pressed together, the guilty glance that neither of us could hide, it all hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. In that moment, time slowed and the air itself seemed to hum with a tension that neither of us could name. She didn't yell, didn't retreat, didn't do the thing that logic demanded. Instead, there was a pause, a beat of silent calculation, and then a movement that changed everything. Her eyes, dark and steady, held a mix of challenge and curiosity, and the corners of her mouth curved into something that could have been a smile or a warning. I had expected anger, confrontation, maybe even tears. But what came instead was a kind of quiet assertion, a claiming of the moment, a refusal to let it end in bitterness. She moved with a fluid confidence, her gestures precise, deliberate, and strangely hypnotic. Each step she took toward us was measured, like the slow turning of a key in a lock, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. There was a heat between us, yes, but it was tempered by restraint and the knowledge that whatever unfolded next would change the boundaries of everything we had known. As I watched, the room seemed smaller, charged with a kind of intimacy that made the air feel almost tactile. There was a brush of skin against skin, a glance that lingered just a heartbeat too long, and the unspoken recognition that some rules had been bent, maybe even broken. Yet the consequences were suspended in a strange, delicate balance. The forbidden had a weight all its own, and suddenly every glance, every subtle movement carried the tension of desire wrapped in hesitation. I caught my own breath, aware of how fragile this moment was, how quickly it could shatter. Her presence was magnetic, a force that drew my attention even as I tried to focus elsewhere. And yet there was no rush, no forced escalation, just an almost surreal clarity, a feeling that every choice, every glance, every whisper of movement mattered more than it ever had. In that suspended space, I realized that the night had taken a turn I couldn't have predicted, and there was a strange thrill in the unpredictability of it all. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the tension tightened, leaving me teetering on the edge of something I didn't dare name aloud. Every sound, every heartbeat, every flicker of expression between us seemed amplified, as if the room itself had become a vessel for anticipation. The air vibrated with possibilities, the unsaid hanging thickly around us, daring me to imagine what would come next. In that charged silence, I knew we were all standing on the brink, suspended between what we were and what we could become, and there was no turning back. The doorway remained open, the night outside fading into a blur, and inside a different kind of intimacy had taken root. Something raw, something compelling, something neither of us fully understood, yet all of us were drawn into its gravity. And just as the moment threatened to tip into chaos, I realized I couldn't look away, couldn't want it to end. The room seemed smaller now, the spaces between us charged with a quiet electricity that neither words nor movement could fully describe. She sat across from us, the soft curves of her posture illuminated by the warm lamplight, and I noticed every subtle flicker of her expression. There was curiosity there, yes, but also a calm authority, the kind of presence that made it impossible to look away. I could feel the tension tighten in my chest, a mixture of awe and something far more complicated. Our eyes met across the small distance, and the air seemed to vibrate with unspoken questions. A fleeting smile, barely noticeable, brushed across her lips, and I wondered what it meant. Was it amusement, approval, or simply a test of boundaries none of us had dared to define? My own gaze flicked away, caught in the weight of unspoken rules and the fear of crossing them. And yet there was a pull, an invisible tether drawing me back toward her, compelling me to notice the way her fingers rested lightly on her knees, the way her hair fell across her shoulder in soft waves. He shifted slightly, unaware or perhaps deliberately ignoring the subtle signals that danced between us. His presence added another layer to the tension, an anchor, a reminder that the desire hovering in the room was both dangerous and irresistible. I could feel the heat of proximity, the brush of accidental contact as our hands nearly touched on the edge of the couch, and my heart raced in response to the smallest, most innocent gestures. It was as though every look, every tilt of the head, every breath drawn too sharply, carried the weight of the moment. I found myself leaning slightly forward, drawn into the orbit of her attention, caught between the urge to speak and the fear of giving away too much. There was a rhythm to the silence, a cadence made up of quick glances, hesitant smiles, and the almost imperceptible tilt of a shoulder. We were all measuring each other, testing the waters without fully acknowledging the depth of what we felt. And in that careful dance the room seemed to shrink further, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to witness what could not yet be named. Her gaze softened at moments, a flicker of something tender and human, and I felt my chest tighten. There was warmth there, a promise of connection, yet it was tempered by caution, by the invisible rules we hadn't yet decided to break. And still the pull persisted, a magnetic force that threaded its way through every shared glance and every brush of movement. Even as my mind raced with doubts and questions, my body responded, attuned to the silent language of tension, curiosity, and restrained desire. The clock ticked somewhere in the background, a distant reminder of time passing, but it might as well have stopped entirely. We existed in this moment alone, suspended between familiarity and temptation, safety and risk, and with each passing second, the room seemed to hum with possibilities. The quiet was punctuated by the subtle sounds of life, the faint rustle of clothing as we shifted, the soft inhale of breath, the almost imperceptible tremor in my fingers. It was intimate, fragile, and achingly real. No words were necessary. The conversation was carried in the tilt of a head, the soft brush of a sleeve against skin, the weight of unspoken longing. I realized that what drew us together wasn't merely curiosity or attraction, but a profound sense of recognition, of shared impulses, of mirrored hesitations, of a desire that dared not fully speak its name. And in that charged silence I understood that the night was far from over. It had only just begun, and the heat between us was growing, slow and deliberate, impossible to ignore. I could feel it, in the small spaces between gestures, in the way her eyes caught the light and held it, in the almost tangible energy that pulsed like a living thing. Something was unfolding here, something delicate and dangerous, and though none of us could say it aloud, we all understood it. The tension remained unresolved, the heat simmering just beneath the surface, leaving me on the edge of anticipation, aware that the next move, the next glance, the next breath, could change everything. The room seemed to pulse around us, each breath and heartbeat magnified in the quiet. I could feel the weight of unspoken words pressing down, the tension threading through the air like an electric current. Every glance carried a charge. Every accidental brush of fingers seemed deliberate in its intensity. And yet, despite the pull, there was an invisible barrier. Walls constructed from habit, loyalty, fear, and the knowledge that crossing the line could unravel everything. She shifted slightly on the couch, and for a moment our eyes met in a flash of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of the desire we all felt but refused to name. It was raw, undeniable, yet impossible to act on without consequence. My chest tightened, a nervous ache that demanded attention, and I realized that the room felt smaller now, as though the space itself conspired to amplify every gesture, every flicker of expression. I almost leaned closer. The thought teased me, the nearness of her, the subtle warmth of her presence, the temptation of the forbidden, but I stopped, a breath away, aware that the urge itself was dangerous, that wanting too much could undo the delicate balance we had established. And yet the desire remained, thick and insistent, curling through every glance and touch. He moved, shifting in his seat, and my hand brushed against his by accident. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a shock through me. I drew back slightly, not out of disinterest but because it was too much, too potent, too real. It was the kind of touch that left a trail, a whisper of longing that refused to fade. Every movement now seemed loaded with meaning, every casual gesture pregnant with intention. Her gaze lingered on him, then drifted to me, a soft complexity in her expression. I could read it, curiosity, hesitation, and a vulnerability carefully masked by confidence. I wanted to speak, to say something that might bridge the distance between us, but words felt insufficient, clumsy, incapable of capturing the layered emotions that wove between us. Instead, we let silence do the talking, and in that quiet the room spoke volumes. The shadows from the soft lighting stretched across the walls, elongating our forms, making the space feel intimate, as though the world outside had ceased to exist. I noticed the subtle ways she adjusted her posture, the tilt of her head, the curl of her fingers, movements that were simple on the surface but resonated with an unspoken depth. Each small detail was magnified, each subtle shift loaded with meaning. I caught myself imagining what it would feel like to close the gap, to bridge the distance that felt both minuscule and insurmountable. But then the weight of everything held us back, the lives we had built, the commitments we had made, the unvoiced fear of consequences. It wasn't rejection that kept us apart, but an intensity so profound it demanded caution, a longing so sharp it required restraint. We all existed in this fragile tension, aware of how close we could come and yet how far we needed to stay. There was a magnetic pull, a gravity that drew us together in fleeting moments, a brush of knees, a shared look, the almost imperceptible tilt of a shoulder, and each time, the air thickened with anticipation. It was sensual without being explicit, charged without needing words, a dance of longing that demanded patience as much as it demanded attention. I could feel it in the quiet inhale of breath, in the subtle flush of skin in the lamplight, in the almost imperceptible sway of movement. Every moment was amplified, the air heavy with things left unsaid. And though none of us acted on it, the intensity grew, wrapping around us like a tangible presence. The tension wasn't resolved, it simmered, a slow burn that refused to be ignored, and in that heat, I realized we were all suspended on the edge of something irrevocable. Even as we sat apart, the longing lingered, potent and unyielding. No one moved closer, yet every motion seemed calculated to tease the possibility, to hint at what could be without fully revealing it. I understood then that this was not merely desire, but a complex weave of fear, curiosity, and the intoxicating allure of what might be. And in that charged silence, with walls both internal and external holding us at bay, I felt the heat thrum beneath the surface, relentless and undeniable, waiting for the moment it could finally be released. The room had grown quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every sound seemed sharper. The soft scrape of a chair leg, the subtle sigh of air shifting, the faint thump of a heartbeat that only I could feel. The tension that had been simmering for hours now pulsed in the space between us, thick and almost tangible, a living thing that neither wanted to dissipate. She leaned slightly forward, the movement almost imperceptible, but it drew my eyes to her with a gravity that made my chest tighten. There was a softness in her gaze, a depth that seemed to reach into parts of me I hadn't known were exposed. For a heartbeat it felt like the world had narrowed to just her, just the space between us, just the invisible line that we both feared to cross. And yet the pull was irresistible. He shifted again, and in that slight motion our hands brushed, a fleeting accidental contact that lingered just a moment too long. The air around it seemed to hum. My fingers tingled not from touch alone but from the weight of what was unspoken, the electricity of longing contained in something as simple as proximity. I pulled back slightly, though not out of reluctance but because wanting it too much suddenly felt dangerous. The heat of desire, restrained and patient, was heavier than any action could ever be. Her lips parted slightly, a soft inhale that seemed almost like a question. I felt it directed at me, though no words came. Her eyes searched mine, and in them I glimpsed a confession that could not be voiced. The room seemed to pulse around her, the lamplight catching the subtle curve of her cheek, the gentle fall of her hair, the quiet strength in her posture. Every detail felt magnified, every shadow and highlight a signal, a language of desire that only we could understand. We drifted closer, unspoken, a careful dance that felt both inevitable and impossible. Every glance, every shallow breath, every tiny movement became a dialogue. The distance between us shrank, not by choice, but by gravity, the pull of something urgent, intimate, and unacknowledged. There was a thrill in that hesitation, in knowing we could bridge the gap but holding back, savoring the friction of nearly touching without surrendering. A whisper slipped past her lips, so soft I could barely hear it, but it landed like a stone in the still water between us. It wasn't a confession exactly, but an acknowledgement of the truth that had hovered unspoken for hours. My heart raced in response, every muscle in my body tuned to the subtle cues of her presence. I wanted to move closer, to feel the warmth of that breath, to close the gap entirely, but I stayed just out of reach, drawn to the edge and held there by the force of restraint. He shifted once more, a minor motion that somehow carried the weight of every unsaid word. The three of us existed in a fragile balance, teetering between restraint and surrender. The electricity in the room had reached a point where it could almost be felt, almost tasted, lingering on skin and in the subtle brush of a sleeve, in the way a shoulder leaned imperceptibly toward another. The heat was undeniable yet unacted upon, and in that tension the world seemed to shrink to just the three of us and the invisible threads that bound us together. Her gaze held mine a fraction too long, and for a moment I imagined the impossible, a closing of distance, a touch that would erase every boundary. My chest ached with the weight of it, every nerve ending aware of the energy suspended between us. And then, without moving closer, without breaking the line, we all exhaled at once, a collective acknowledgement of what was there, what could not be ignored, and what we were daring ourselves to hold back. The room fell silent, but it was a silence alive with possibility. Every glance, every faint movement, every unspoken thought vibrated in that space. It was raw, it was poetic, and it was electric, the kind of intimacy that could explode at any moment yet had not. The heat of desire, of recognition, of longing, lingered like a flame that threatened to leap forward, but for now we simply existed in it, suspended, breathless and aching in the quiet. The rain tapped gently against the windows, a soft rhythmic melody that seemed to mirror the pulse of the room. Warm light pooled in corners, painting the space with a golden glow that softened edges and made shadows curl in intimate shapes. Every sound was magnified, the subtle shuffle of movement, the brush of hair against skin, the quiet intake of breath. The night had condensed into a single charged moment, and we all felt it, every nerve alert, every glance weighted with anticipation. She leaned toward him, her shoulder brushing his in a way that could have been accidental but felt deliberate. Her breath melted into the air between them, and I noticed the subtle catch in my own chest at the closeness of it. There was no need for words, their bodies spoke the language we hadn't dared voice, and the heat in the room hummed in response. Time seemed to stretch, each second lingering, elongated by the quiet electricity threading between us. I watched enthralled as the smallest gestures became monumental. Fingers grazed just enough to communicate longing. A lean of the head toward a shoulder carried vulnerability and invitation. A shared glance conveyed more than sentences ever could. The world outside the rain-drenched windows ceased to exist, leaving only this cocoon of light, warmth, and unspoken understanding. Their eyes met again, lingering longer than before, and for a heartbeat the air between us thickened so much it felt almost tangible. She didn't move closer, and yet in that moment she was nearer than she had ever been. The space between them crackled with anticipation, a magnetic pull that made it impossible to look away. My own senses felt alive, attuned to the rhythm of breathing, the subtle shift of weight, the way shoulders tilted toward one another without crossing lines. It was a dance of intimacy, elegant and controlled, but electric in its honesty. A soft exhale broke the tension, and the smallest of smiles curved her lips. It wasn't mischief exactly, but a quiet acknowledgement, a surrender without words. He responded in kind, a slow tilt of his head, a gentle inclination that said everything they couldn't voice. And suddenly the air felt warm, almost too warm, as if it had absorbed the essence of their connection and held it for all of us to feel. I felt the pull in my own chest, a mixture of awe, desire, and surrender to the moment. The rain outside intensified, a delicate patter that lent intimacy to every glance, every brush of skin, every inhalation of shared breath. The soft light caught in her hair, highlighted the gentle curves of shoulders and the subtle rise and fall of chest. And I realized that what we were witnessing, what we were all part of, was pure emotion distilled into human form. Their hands moved almost instinctively, fingertips tracing the invisible lines of tension, reading each other's desire through the language of proximity and touch. There was a rhythm to it, a slow and deliberate cadence that required no words. Each breath became a conversation, each heartbeat a punctuation in a dialogue neither dared to speak aloud. And yet it was intimate beyond measure, breathtaking in its simplicity, electric in its restraint. The night held us in its sway, the rain outside a gentle curtain, the lamplight wrapping everything in a soft embrace. Their closeness, the almost imperceptible leaning toward one another, the way their gazes softened with recognition, created a heat that was invisible yet undeniable. It was as if the room itself had become a vessel for what could not be said, a silent symphony of longing, tenderness, and surrender. And in that suspended luminous moment, nothing else mattered. The world could wait, the rain could continue its gentle rhythm, the night could stretch on forever. Their connection was unspoken yet undeniable, a poetry written in the language of shared glances, soft breaths, and the electric hum of closeness that left every one of us awed, breathless, and trembling in anticipation. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, pale and hesitant, like it didn't want to disturb the fragile cocoon the night had left behind. The room smelled faintly of rain and warmth, of fabric pressed against skin and the residue of closeness that couldn't be ignored. Silence hung in the corners, heavy but not suffocating, punctuated only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant chirp of a bird. We sat each in our own orbit, hesitant to bridge the space. Eyes flicked toward each other and then away, caught between curiosity and caution. No words had yet been spoken to define what had happened, and perhaps that made the moment even more potent. The tension remained, but it was softened now by something else, a tentative intimacy, a recognition that nothing could ever erase what had passed. I traced the rim of my coffee cup with my finger, aware of the quiet weight pressing on my chest. Was it guilt, or something more complicated, layered beneath self-reproach and wonder? The memory of last night hummed just beneath the surface. The brush of hair against shoulder, the almost touch of fingers, the shared breath that had said what no words could. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also messy, fragile, human. She sat across from me, shoulders slightly hunched, hands wrapped around her own cup, eyes fixed on some point beyond the window. Every so often a glance flicked my way, and for a moment the air vibrated again, electric and tentative. There was something unspoken between us, a truth that hovered, delicate and insistent. It wasn't just desire anymore. It was connection, a quiet awareness of the gravity we had created together. He shifted beside her, small movements that seemed to echo our shared uncertainty. The morning carried a softness, a gentleness, but also a weight, a reminder that last night had changed something fundamental. There was no need to speak it aloud. Our bodies remembered, our eyes remembered, and that memory itself was a language richer than words could provide. A laugh escaped her, soft, uncertain, a thread of warmth in the quiet. It startled me, not because it was loud but because it was human, real, a reminder that beneath the tension, beneath the longing, we were still ourselves. I felt my chest loosen slightly, the first exhale after hours of holding my breath. There was peace here, but it was fragile, delicate as the drizzle still clinging to the windows. And then, as if the universe had decided to punctuate the morning, a knock sounded at the door. Sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. We all froze, hearts skipping in a way that was almost playful and almost panicked. Who could it be? Someone from outside the cocoon of the night? Or someone who had been waiting unaware to shatter the quiet we had been weaving? The door opened slowly, and a familiar face stepped in. A friend, or perhaps a messenger of truths we had forgotten to consider. Their presence was a jolt, a reminder that the world outside still existed, that reality waited beyond the intimacy of the room. Yet strangely, it didn't break the connection. Instead, it emphasized it. The glance we shared was a silent acknowledgement. Whatever else happened, whatever consequences waited, the bond we had created was undeniable. We didn't speak immediately. There was a pause, a shared exhale, a moment to remember that last night had been real, vivid and transformative. The morning carried tension, yes, but also a new depth, the kind of understanding that only comes from raw, unfiltered connection. It was messy, complicated, human and breathtaking all at once. As the sunlight strengthened, spilling more warmth into the room, a slow awareness settled over us. Love? Escape? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. But certainty existed in our shared glance, in the faint brush of hands on the table, in the quiet rhythm of breathing that matched across the small space. We were changed, intertwined by moments that defied explanation, and even the arrival of the unexpected visitor could not undo the truth we now carried. In the fragile morning light, we simply existed together, a little wary, a little humbled, but profoundly connected. The room had become a witness to our hearts, and though nothing had been resolved fully, everything had shifted. The aftermath was messy, real and tender, and in that there was an elegance that no words could capture. The late afternoon sun spilled through the windows, soft and golden, painting the room in gentle warmth. Shadows stretched long and slow across the floor, and the quiet hum of the city outside felt distant, as if it belonged to another world. We moved through the space carefully, tenderly, aware of the fragility of what had passed and the weight of what lingered. There was no rush, no urgent need to define, only a shared understanding that this moment, whatever it was, deserved care. She rested her head lightly against his shoulder, and the subtle rise and fall of his chest beneath her ear felt like an anchor. Their fingers intertwined, not out of necessity but out of choice, a deliberate acknowledgement of the connection forged in whispered glances and quiet breath. I watched, heart full, as the small gestures, a brush of hair, a soft inhale, a lingering touch, spoke volumes more than words ever could. There was a gentle rhythm to our silence. No one forced conversation, none was needed. The space between us carried the memory of the night before, the echoes of shared tension, the weight of longing finally met with tenderness. It was a quiet intimacy, refined and deliberate, where skin against skin wasn't about desire alone but about understanding, reassurance and trust. Their lips met foreheads in a slow, deliberate gesture, a sealing of peace, a momentary choice of hearts over chaos. The warmth radiated outward, and I felt it too, a soft reminder that connections could be complex and messy and still be beautiful. It was not a triumphant or dramatic ending but a quiet victory of being seen and acknowledged, of emotions fully felt and gently returned. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed and gleaming. The light shifted as clouds moved across the sky, illuminating the room in soft, flickering tones. It mirrored the emotions that lingered, fleeting, delicate yet permanent in the memory of what we had shared. I realized then that love, or the bond we had created, didn't have to scream to be real. It could live in small gestures, in pauses, in the warmth of a hand held too long, or a glance that spoke of understanding. The three of us stayed like that, hearts attuned to one another, breaths falling into quiet harmony. And though the future was uncertain, though paths might diverge, the imprint of the night, of the morning, of the unspoken truths remained vivid and unshakable. There was peace here, subtle and deliberate, a resolution born of acceptance, not certainty. I felt the soft brush of a hand on my arm, the lightest pressure that said everything and nothing at once. I returned it slowly, deliberately, acknowledging that the bond we shared, however fleeting or permanent, had changed us. The world beyond the room existed still, with its expectations, judgments, and responsibilities. But for now, the quiet intimacy within these walls was enough. It was a promise of presence, of emotional resonance that didn't demand explanation. As the sun dipped lower, spilling the last golden shards across the floor, a smile, faint, private, and knowing, passed between us. It was the acknowledgement of memory and possibility, of moments savored and understood. Whether paths remained entwined or separated, the warmth lingered, a perfume of human connection that would not fade. And in that warmth, hearts chose peace. No dramatic flourish marked the ending. No words were shouted, no declarations demanded. Instead, there was the quiet dignity of intimacy remembered, the lingering heat of human closeness, and the serene acknowledgement that some connections endure precisely because they are treated with care. And in the still golden light of the room, the night and its echoes rested finally, leaving goosebumps in its wake and a slow, resonant sense of closure.